What's up, buddy?
Hey, what's up?
How you doing, big guy?
I'm good. How are you?
Just get home from school?
Yeah.
How was school today?
Boring.
You ready to start?
Yeah, I'm ready to start. Be great.
Why don't we start off with you telling us who you are and maybe even our connection, and then we'll jump into the topic.
It's great. I love it.
So Eddy Shigley, everybody. Dr. Eddy Shigley.
Hi, my name is Eddy Shigley. I'm a professor at Indiana Wesleyan University in Marion, Indiana. I teach in the School of Theology and Ministry. I teach a lot of practical theology courses. In other words, the idea of how do you actually do ministry in a local church context or in a maybe even a different ministry context. And it's just a joy and a privilege for me to feel like I am part of training, equipping, and mentoring the next generation of pastors. So that's what I'm doing currently right now. I've been youth pastor, college pastor, pastor of discipleship, assimilation, small groups, all kinds of other different kinds of roles I've played through the years, been part of Christian camping and a part of another Christian university. But my relation to Aaron Stroman specifically is way back in the day. I was Aaron's youth pastor, which I had the privilege of seeing Aaron grow up and mature into the man that he is today. And the awesome part about that is that we've stayed in touch through the years. And so I've seen him grow as a man and as a father. And that's been a really huge privilege for me.
What are your, I'll say, qualifications? Are you a father? Tell us about your family.
Yes.
Your experience in fatherhood.
Yeah. So I met this incredible, wonderful, gorgeous, godly woman in college. Her name is Esther. She is the seventh child of 8 in her family. I'm the seventh child of 7 in my family. And so people used to make fun of us and say, oh, you need to have 7 kids then, because 7 is this biblical number. And we said, there's no way. That's for crazy people like our parents. But God does have an incredible sense of humor, and we do have 7 children. I usually tell a story of, how those 7 children came about, but we had 7 children in 9 years. And so they're really close in age. We love that. We love them being each other's best friends. Mm-hmm. And they never lacked for having a play partner. Yeah. They are now ages 30 to 21.
Okay.
So 9 years apart, 9 years spread, basically 9.5 years spread. And so they're all adult children out of the home. We are empty nesters. And so ages 21 to 30 right now.
Wow. So you have some experience to draw from.
And this last weekend was really fun. It was grandparents weekend. So we had our 3 grandchildren all weekend from Thursday through Monday morning till this morning. Wow. So that was a huge blessing to now have the opportunity to pour into our grandchildren and to see them start to love Jesus. Their ages 4, 2, and like 5 months.
So you have 3 grandkids currently?
Yeah, our oldest son, Trey, has all 3 grandkids. The other kids got to get busy, man. They need to get with the program.
He's following in his father's footsteps. The other ones are slacking off.
I think they want 4 to 6. So not 46, 4 to 6.
So I've, my kids are junior and sophomore in high school this year. And for a while I was like, man, I'm going to run out of years to do this podcast because my kids are going to become adults. But then talking to you and other people, it's like parenting adult children is a whole nother world.
It's a whole different world. And I never thought, I don't know why, but for some reason I thought that when they turn 18, we're kind of done and you send them off to college. We've done our work and you launch them to go love Jesus and start their own families and to dive into the church and things like that. But wow, the complexities of adult children is just so myriad and varied. And they still seek your advice, which we love. but we also know like we want to be careful with that they're trying to spread their wings and trying to fly, and we want them to fly.
That's good. Are you familiar with I think it's called the Boone Family Center at Pepperdine?
I am not familiar with that.
It's some division of Pepperdine University, and they do like the family ministry type on the academia side. But I interviewed one of their people, Dee Dee Mayer, and she told me top 3 influences in a kid's life. Number 1 is father, which I was surprised to hear that from a woman, but she just stating the studies, right? So
yeah, the
father,
facts and studies. Yeah.
Number 2 is mother, and then number 3 is grandparents. And so what you're doing, I never thought about that before. I thought it'd be maybe youth pastor, or you get into like a coach, coaches or mentors, favorite teacher or something. But she said grandparents are the next influential to the parents. And so
that's awesome.
cool. You're doing
here's another crazy stat. Okay. So, and this is a sobering statistic that puts a lot of emphasis on our role as fathers, Aaron, because I've read somewhere, I can't remember the source right now, but if a child is the first one to come to Christ in the family, the probability rate for the rest of the family come to Christ is 15 to 20%. Okay. If the mom comes to Christ first in the family, the probability rate for the entire family to come to Christ just jumps up a little bit to 25 to 30%. If the dad comes to Christ first, the probability rate for the entire family to come to Christ jumps up to 75 to 80%.
Wow.
It's crazy the influence that we as fathers have with our children, with our spouses. It puts, like, we need to understand that responsibility.
Yeah.
And steward it well.
We're going through what I call 17 laws of the intentional father. Today, we're going to be talking about law number 5, which is law of the cream. And this law says that children will live up to the expectations placed on them. The idea of law of the cream is a cream rises to the top. Let's talk about expectations for children, because there seems to be 2 extremes. One is like having 0 expectations on one end of the spectrum, and the other is having super high unrealistic expectations. But what are your thoughts, experiences, any stories to share about how we should manage expectations on our children?
Yeah, it's really interesting because every child is different and every child has a different personality. And when you think of, Proverbs 22:6, train up a child in the way he should go, and even when they're old, they will not depart from it. Part of that translation talks about like their personality bent, talks about their gifts, talks about the core of who they are. And so, that's a challenge when you start talking about expectations, because you want to have the same standard of expectations with every child. But how you go about training that child to the standard might be different. And I think, we're just kind of prepping a little bit for that podcast. And we talked a little bit about this idea of, if we have these ridiculous expectations, that can exasperate a child. If we expect, our son to be NBA, all-star, that can really exasperate a child who's not gifted to play basketball. Maybe doesn't have the height to play basketball, doesn't have the skill to play basketball. Yet we have we've placed these unrealistic expectations upon them. And so, what are realistic expectations? How do you have like a standard of expectations for the family? And yet you go about training them maybe a little bit differently according to their bent to still reach that expectation. So an expectation would be something like, we would hope and pray and expect that all of our children would come to love Jesus and serve him in the church in some capacity, right? So that's an expectation. When they're super little, when we're talking about preschool, an expectation would be to that they would obey people of authority, and that they would learn to be self-controlled, keep their hands, self-control with their hands, self-control with their mouths, so they're not talking incessantly, self-control with their feet, self-control with like whether they're touching people or not touching people. And so when they're really little, you have that expectation of learning obedience, respect for adults and for others, and having like self-control. And so that's an expectation. How you kind of reach that expectation and how you train into that might look a little bit different, but the standard is the same. Like we don't lower the bar or lower the standard because one child is strong-willed, right? And the other child is compliant, naturally compliant. And we went through this phase where our first child was really compliant, okay, extremely compliant, wanted to please the parents. And a lot of firstborns are. And so we thought we were the best parents in the world. Like, why do people think parenting is so difficult? Why do they think it's so hard? Like, come on, like this is a piece of cake. And then child number 2 came along and she was strong-willed, and then all of a sudden it's kind of reality hits you that, man, this parenting thing is difficult. And how do you train them and teach them to that same standard, but they're completely different personalities, right? They're completely different gifts or strengths. And even just speaking into number 2, into her life of, we didn't want to like completely squelch her, with that strong will, because God wants to use that. God wants to use that for her to be a leader. We just wanted to redirect it into the right ways and the right avenues and the right streams in which God could be glorified in her life. But they're completely different people. And then number 5 is he is a party animal. Like he is the life of the party, and he is all about people. And he could easily, though, become a people pleaser. And so how do you get him to the same standard? Even though he's a natural leader, he's also tempted to always want to please people and be a follower. And yet we're saying, no, God wants you to lead others in a way that pleases him. So I think it's doable, right? It's doable, but we have to realize that we may go about it a little bit differently with each child for that expectations that we have as a family.
What can you remember any differences in approach to your compliant child versus a strong-willed child?
Yeah, a lot more conversations. A lot more conversations with a compliant child. I mean, here's something too. When they're little, this is a really important, because a lot of people listening to this podcast might have small children. When I say small children, we're talking about preschool, elementary age children. Okay. So when it comes to obedience, and let's say obedience is the standard. Okay. We want you, and it's not just obedience. Obedience is not only the standard, but first time obedience is the standard.
Yeah.
Can we train our children to first time obedience? And for us, we have a definition of what first time obedience is. And that is to obey immediately, to obey completely, and then to obey with a cheerful heart. Okay. So the first child who's compliant might obey immediately, but may not obey completely, may not finish it, right? A strong-willed child may fight you like crazy at the beginning, whine, complain. So how do you train them to do it cheerfully? But they will do it and they will finish it, okay? Because they are task-oriented and driven personality, but they might at the front end not be cheerful. So how do you help them to respond with a cheerful heart when you've asked them to do something? And so that, that's some of those nuances of going into the intricacies of training them differently just on the scale of obedience. And we have to realize that especially when they're young children, we're talking about, again, preschool, elementary age kids, mean, we're talking, this is the training phase. And you are just training. This is not the time to be your child's friend. This is it's the time to be your child's parent. And you're training them nonstop to those expectations you have as a family, to obedience, to self-control, to loving Jesus. So how do you train them to love Jesus? I mean, memorizing scripture, getting them into opportunities in which they can make decisions for Christ. We're going to go to church. We are going to church every time the doors are open. When they become teenagers and they don't feel like it, it's not whether I feel like it or I don't feel like it. You're always going to go. You're not going to, complain and whine. You're going to do that with a cheerful heart. And you're going to go to youth camp. You're going to go to mission trips. We're going to put them into opportunities where the Holy Spirit can work on their heart, right? And so it's providing those opportunities for them and for the Holy Spirit to work on them so they do fall in love with Jesus and Jesus becomes their first love and their first priority. Obviously, we can't make them, right?
Right. Yeah.
It defeats this whole idea of it's a love relationship, but we are going to set a standard. We're always going to go to church when the doors are open, and we're going to put you in places and give you opportunities for the Holy Spirit to work on your heart.
Okay. I'm going to sidetrack us a little bit. So I think the hardest part that I've had in parenting is, and this comes down to my strong-willed child, but man, I have struggled trying to teach how to have a good attitude, which I think is in that same realm as a cheerful heart. And there's been some things that I've done that I think have helped, but then there's days where I'm like, we haven't made any progress at all.
Yes.
Do you have any advice?
Yeah. So going back to the idea, it's training. When they would even ask for something, a child may demand, right? And we say, no, you can't demand. Now ask that again and ask it this time with a good attitude or with a cheerful heart. Or they may come into the family room or the living room or your bedroom, and maybe they're whining or maybe they're complaining, and they say, okay, stop, go back outside the room, re-enter this time with a good attitude or with a cheerful heart. We even train our kids, and some of these tendencies carry on. I mean, you can kind of curb that behavior a little bit. You can help them to be a little bit more mindful, to have a good attitude or be cheerful, but they still, some of their dispositions in that base core personality stays with them. So we have a daughter whose resting face, people think she's mad. And it's just her resting face. People think she's upset. People think she's mad, and she's not. She might be contemplative, right? She might be thinking, but that face looks like she's angry. And so she can't see her face, when she's thinking or when she's in those moments, she can't see it. So we will even train her okay, we're going to go to the mirror. This is what you look like. Do you see how people can have a confused message? Because she'll say, why do always people think I'm angry? Why do people think I'm mad all the time? I'm not at all. And she really is inside cheerful, but on the outside, she doesn't look cheerful at all. So I say, okay, let's help you with your resting face. Lift your eyebrows. Back to the Pine Cove days a little bit, Aaron. Lift your eyebrows a little bit. Try to smile your resting face a little bit so that people know that you're not angry. So even things like that can be misconstrued that you have a bad attitude. And her profs, even in college, was reading her wrongly and were judging her because of even that resting face. And so conversations, talking about mirror, those kinds of things, repeating with the same tone what they have said to you, so they can hear it back at you. And they might even say, why are you yelling at me? I'm not yelling at you. I am repeating this at the exact same volume and tone in which you spoke to me. I want you to hear it. Like, oh, okay, I'm so sorry. It's just for them to see it, hear it, realize what's going on, and help them to go, okay, how are actually other people seeing you because you can't see yourself? How are other people hearing you because we're kind of muted a little bit with our own voices? And I mean, think about this. Remember the very first time you listened to a sermon of yours, or
Yes.
you watched yourself
Oh my
deliver a
gosh.
sermon.
Yeah.
Like, this is so painful. I can't believe I say these words this many times. I can't believe my mannerisms, my actions, my facial expressions, my body language. And it's a painful process. And because we don't see ourselves, we don't see our facial expressions, we don't realize what we're doing at times.
Yeah. It's very painful.
Yeah. Even record them. You can hear how they're saying things and what they're saying and in what tone and language they're using.
Even this podcast, I go back. So I listen to all my podcasts on 1.5 speed.
Yes.
And when I listen to myself, 1.5 speed is a speed at which I should just talk. If I turn to regular speed, it's so slow. I'm like, why do I talk so slow? I need to speed this thing up. So if you're listening to the podcast, bump it up to 1.5 or like double speed, because
It'll sound more normal.
oh my goodness, it's terrible. Okay, those are good ideas. I've used some of those with my strong-willed child, but not all of them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the attitude, it's just been a tough one for me.
Yeah, and I think everybody needs a strong-willed child. It brings reality to parenting, and it helps us to begin to think outside the box of what we think works. And so I just remember, we don't want to break their will. Like, that's not the purpose, is to break their will. The purpose, I think, of parenting with a strong-willed child is to shape their will. There's a book we read, when our kids were little, and we thought it was just really helpful. And in fact, I'm going to look it up. It's by Ted Tripp, and the whole thing was about shepherding a child's heart. And it's the idea of helping them to be sensitive to the Holy Spirit, but also helping them to be respectful of other people and to be sensitive to others and to be thinking of others first. And so how do we shepherd a child's heart? Like, how do we do that? Man, that starts when they're little, and talking to them about how they treat their siblings, how they treat others at the playground, how they even treat a flower bed.
Wow.
As simple as that, instead of traipsing through it or picking all the flowers of a flower bed, that we respect that so other people can enjoy the beauty of that flower bed. I mean, those are all like concepts, and that is based on principles for them to learn that carries over into other things in life for them to be sensitive to.
Yeah, it's good. What are other expectations that are somewhat universal that you would say all parents should have these expectations of their children? We talked about the spiritual expectation, which I agree. I've never given my kids a choice on church attendance. It's like, that's a decision I'm making. We're gonna go. You talked about obedience. I think that's a good one. What other are there any others that you'd say, man, the world would be better if parents had these expectations on their children?
Well, starting one with honor your father and your mother. Okay. So what does that look like? Okay. And that leads into obedience as part of honoring. And I can remember early on, when our kids were little, they grew up in the South. Okay. The South shows a different respect for elders than those living in the North. And if you've lived in both settings, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But we started off by teaching them to say, yes, mommy, yes, daddy, that sort of thing. But then we realized it didn't translate into other adults, to their small group leader, to their Sunday school teacher, to their teacher at school, those kinds of things. And so we changed it to yes, sir, yes, ma'am, no, sir, no, ma'am. So just having respect for others is huge. That is a quality that is better, in my opinion, better taught in the South. Now, it doesn't mean kids aren't disrespectful in the South. They're just very respectful to your face. And then they're going off and doing other stuff, right?
Right.
But actually, to you, they are super respectful. I mean, that is like built into the culture and the DNA of the South. Doesn't make them better in terms of their behavior, but it just makes that, that outward respect is there. So I think respect of not just adults or people in authority, but respecting everyone is huge. We even have I think one of the baseline expectations we should have as parents too is that as parents, we should have the expectation that the home, the family, is the number one discipler of our children. Like, we need to disciple our children. Even though, yes, we're going to go to church, we're going to go every time the church doors are open, the church's responsibility is to come alongside the family, to equip and to reiterate what the family's already teaching. But we have to feel that weight of that responsibility to disciple our kids.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of families, what they do is we kind of like put this off to the spiritual professionals, and we allow the church to do that discipleship, spiritual discipleship. And so we kind of pay them with our tithe, if you will, to do the spiritual discipleship, where we need to be feeling that weight. So we came up with we actually came up with a document as an idea of, okay, if we're to begin with the end in mind of when our kids leave our home, what are our expectations, or rephrase it, what are the goals we have for our children? And we're talking like specifically spiritually, and then we can go into other areas of like social awareness or athletics, or even academics, because that's a whole nother area that people sometimes have very unrealistic expectations. So we have 12 family goals or spiritual goals for our children that we want them to embrace when they leave our home. Okay. Number one, have a growing, loving personal relationship with Jesus Christ that is modeled in John chapter 3, John 14 and 15, 3 John 4. Number two, always remember who you are and who you represent. You're a child of God, and you are a Shigley. You represent Jesus Christ, the Shigley family, and yourself. Be an ambassador for Christ, 2 Corinthians 5:20. I mean, Aaron, this is every single time we drop them off for school or drop them off for some type of sports practice. We would remind them, like, who are you? Whose are you? Who do you represent? Okay. I'm a child of God. I'm a Shigley, and my first name is, okay. Who are you? Whose are you? And who do you represent? Like, that was reminder almost every single time. And then we would also talk about, now, how are you going to treat your teammates? How are you going to treat your classmates? How are you going to, what's your work ethic going to look like at school? What's your work ethic going to look like at practice? And we're asking them the questions because we want them to repeat it and for them to take ownership. It got to the point where we start to remind them and they go, I know. And they would like go through the line.
Yeah.
They would finish the story, right? And so it becomes their own. It's like it becomes second nature. Number three, do your best in school, sports, music, work, whatever you do in order to bring glory and honor to God. So be a hard worker, be known for your character and God's character inside of you, which is Colossians 3:23, 1 Corinthians 10:31. So that principle, I think, carries over in so many different areas of life. It carries over academically, carries over with sports, it carries over in your professional life, in your job. So that principle translates in a lot of different ways, not just spiritually. And so this is one that we would talk about a lot. And it's really interesting when you think about like the academic side. I think a lot of parents think about, okay, you have to get good grades. You have to build your resume to get into a certain school. And if you get into a certain school, then you're going to get certain jobs. And we never emphasize that idea of getting into a certain school or getting certain grades. We just emphasize doing your best. Like, have a good, strong work ethic and to do your best. And the crazy thing is, I don't even think, but maybe a couple times when our kids got to high school, I don't even think we ever even looked at the report cards. That wasn't that. Yeah, one, didn't have to. And two, the grade actually wasn't the goal. The goal is for you to do your best.
Yeah.
Right. I don't think we ever asked them, hey, so what are your grades? You know, we didn't have to. It was in them as part of their DNA. Two of them did graduate valedictorian. Five others were all like 4.78 GPA. They weren't valedictorian because now it depends on how many AP classes you take, And when our kids said, I could take this AP, AB calculus class and be stressed out all semester, but am I really going to need that for college? I could take a dual enrollment math class and get college credit and not have to stress. And we go, fine, that's great. I love how you're thinking, and I love your decision. You're not going to be a math major in college. Great. Awesome. Go for it. And so there's different ways to kind of think through that, even academically. Should they really be in that AB calculus class that's unbelievably demanding and has 2 hours of homework every night, when you want them to be well-rounded and also be in a sport or also be involved in a youth group and also, right?
Yeah.
And so it's thinking through some of those kinds of things, that isn't the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is, man, where's your heart? And is your heart centered on Jesus? So that principle number 3, that do your best in order to glorify God, I think is huge and carries over into all walks of life.
Mm-hmm.
4, inside our home, we practice the ministry of reconciliation. So making our relationship right with God and also right with other people. And this is an extension of grace. And so this idea of we need to learn to forgive others, and we need to learn to also ask for forgiveness.
Yeah.
And that's why, man, you've done this. I've done this. One child has hurt their little brother, and you make them go back and tell them you're sorry, and even before they feel like saying they're sorry, they still have to say they're sorry, because with children, actions precede beliefs. So we have to teach them the right actions before they even believe it. With adults, it's opposite. It's beliefs precede actions. But with children, actions precede beliefs. So we have to help them with that DNA of learning the right things before they start believing the right things. Number 5 is be kind and considerate of others, putting others and their interest before yourself and your own. Romans 12, Ephesians 4:32, Philippians 4:3-4. Number 6, be a servant leader, leading by the example of your own life and leading by words and action, and to serve others. Mark chapter 9, Matthew 20:28. Jesus said, I've come not to be served, but to serve and give my life as a ransom for many. Number 7, live a life of purity and holiness, to be above reproach. The daily practice of spiritual disciplines guide right thinking, pure speech, and holy living. Ephesians 5:3-4. So there's not even a hint of sin in our life, like that whole idea. 1 Timothy 4:12. And this too is like we had family devos every night. I should qualify that. 5 out of 7 nights. We gave ourselves some grace with that, because sometimes schedules are crazy. And so probably 5 out of 7 nights of the week, we'd have family devos. We're encouraging them to read the word. And I think, I could be wrong with this, but I think every one of our children on their own read through the Bible from cover to cover before they left our home for college.
Wow.
And so that was part of it. I know one of them read it probably 3 or 4 times before she left for college. And one year she took the NIV study Bible and not only read everything in the Bible, but then, all those footnotes in the NIV study Bible, she read all those footnotes too, because she wanted to go deeper into the text and what it means. And this is something she decided. I didn't challenge her with that. And when she told me she was doing it, I was like, oh my goodness, I'm blown away And I am being challenged by my daughter who's 16,
Mhm.
And you love that.
Yeah.
So number 8 was be able to give a clear presentation of the gospel in order to lead someone to Christ, and always be ready to give an answer for the hope that you have. They memorized the Roman road. They memorized different ways and to explain the gospel as part of those family devos, whether it's the beaded bracelet with the different colors, or whatever it was. We teach them how to lead someone else to Christ. Number 9 is marry someone who's passionately in love with Jesus Christ and do not be yoked with an unbeliever, Matthew chapter 22, 2 Corinthians chapter 6. Number 10, and our three boys are married, our 4 girls are not married. And they all married super well. And I mean, we're just tickled to death. And they in fact invited us into the relationship. Sometimes before they started dating, they invited us into the relationship and asked our opinion and asked us to interview, the girl that they're interested in, which is crazy.
Yeah.
In and of itself, that they lean into parents and their parents' wisdom. Number 10, love your wife like Christ loved the church for our boys. Respect and love your husbands for our girls. And then to be a godly husband, to be a godly wife in Ephesians chapter 5. Number 11, to be godly parents, to train your children to love, fear, and serve Jesus. Proverbs 22:6, to train up a child. And then number 12, be involved in ministry in some capacity your entire life. Matthew chapter 28, go and make disciples. And the other thing is crazy is we never stressed with the idea of you have to be in ministry. And they grew up in a pastor's home, Aaron. Like, they know what it's like to live in a fishbowl. They know what it's like to live in a glass house. And I don't necessarily wish that upon anybody unless they are called.
Right.
And if they're called by Jesus to pursue that as a profession, then you have to follow that calling. You can't do anything else.
Yeah.
And yet 5 of our kids are called to some form of ministry, and they're pursuing that, which is crazy to think about. And we're excited. We're happy for them that they are pursuing that. 2 of them are youth pastors right now. And then I have 3 daughters who feel called to the mission field. So they are preparing to go to the mission field and using their own unique profession to reach people for Jesus.
Nice.
Yeah.
And can you email me those 12?
Yes.
Could I post those on
Put them in the footnotes or something like that? Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah. And I think that's the thing too, like going back to things like sports or things like academics, the principle is to do your best for the glory of God, not to be a star in your high school in some sport, not to graduate valedictorian necessarily, or to get into a certain college, to get a certain job. It was very different than that. It was do your best and pursue excellence in order to give God the glory. Like, make sure that we're always pointing to him and not pointing or patting our own back or whatever.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've never placed a grade expectation on my kids.
Mm-hmm.
And they both desire to keep A's. They want A's in all their classes. And it seems like that's a lot easier than me trying to manage or control that. But when they're owning it, it's like, great, I don't have to own it. So
yes. And we've asked ourselves the question, Aaron, several times, like, how'd that happen? We don't check their grades. They all work super hard. They all pursue excellence. They all get great grades, but that's nothing. We've never emphasized that. So how did that happen? We've asked ourselves that question. And the only thing we can think of is coming back to this principle, that they're simply applying this principle.
Right.
At the same time, I think younger siblings feel the pressure, not because we've placed pressure on them, but maybe they feel the pressure of their older siblings and how they have excelled or succeeded in something. And I can remember, our first 2 kids were valedictorian. Our next 2 graduated like a 4.789 or something like that. And child number 5, but he's our
Party
Number
animal.
seven on the Enneagram, and just loves a party, right? In a good way, party. He's a youth pastor. So very first semester of his freshman year, he got a B. And he came and showed us on the report card. Like, we never took report cards. He showed us on the report card, all A's and one B. He goes, I just want to get that out of the way. Our first four kids never got a B, right? And so he's first semester, freshman year, just wanted to get this out of the way.
Oh man.
Just like wanted to like take that expectation off of him. And we never even had that expectation placed on him, but he probably felt that from the older kids. And we just we laughed, you know, we laughed and said, oh no, you're way different than the other four. And, you know, you just go do your best, you know.
Some good positive peer pressure there within the family. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh man. Yeah. Good.
I think another thing is, and we live in this sports craze culture. Okay. And with our oldest, we chased after that a little bit and then learned like that's stupid. We're living in Oklahoma at the time, and baseball is insane in Oklahoma. Football is, baseball is kind of insane. And Trey was naturally talented and athlete and just incredible hand-eye coordination. So baseball was kind of the obvious thing. And he was gifted. And so he got asked to be on a travel team, right? You have all these different travel teams, soccer, basketball, AAU, whatever. This was a baseball travel team. And this was, you know, age 10 travel team where they're starting practice in January, and you finish the season at the end of July. You take August off, and then you start fall baseball in September, right? And you're 10. You're 10, right? And you're playing 60, 70 baseball games, you know, and you're 10. You're 10. And wanting to like have kids focus on one sport when you're 10, instead of you have baseball season, you have cross country or football season, and then you have basketball season, you know, and you're playing different sports and you're involved in different things, whether it's cross country, volleyball, track, soccer, you know, football, baseball, softball, what, right? And you go and play 3 sports. We had, because we had so many kids, one of the rules we had, you can only do one thing at a time. Like, you can't play multiple sports in a given season. Like, we can't do that. We can't handle that. So we started this whole, like, we were like, oh, wow, this is cool. He's being asked to do this. This is awesome. And literally what I've discovered, Aaron, is these parents put so much pressure on their kids to perform at such a high level. And here's the reason why: to get a full ride in college.
I know.
It's crazy. And the pressure is real to get a full athletic scholarship in college. And we don't realize how actually, I'm a college coach. We don't realize how rare that is to get a full ride. In fact, there's way more money in academics than there is in athletics. We don't realize that because athletics is so much the forefront of our culture. But that's true. That's reality. And so here's then the rest of the story. Out of that group of kids, 12 of them who started that ridiculous, insane schedule to do this travel baseball, age 10. And as they did that all the way up until high school, and then high school does this crazy schedule. I think they played about 30 games in their high school baseball schedule. And then I think Trey played another 40 games in his summer baseball schedule. So he's playing 70 games just between spring and summer. And the reality is 3 of them, of that group of 12, played college baseball. I need to take it back. 4 of them played college baseball. 1 at a JUCO for a year, another one at a JUCO for a semester. One of them actually did pitch Division I baseball all 4 years. and was a pitcher. He threw in the 90s. So he's going to find a place. If you throw in the 90s, you're going to find a place. And then Trey, who played at Indiana Wesleyan. But only 2 of them actually played through college.
Right. Did any of them have a full ride from baseball?
I don't know if Zach had Trey didn't have close to a full ride as baseball. And I don't know if Zach did or not. I'd have to ask his dad, but I don't think so. It might've been a half a ride, you know?
Yeah.
But certainly not a full ride.
Yeah. I saw it so much as a youth pastor, these families kind of pushing these sports on the kids. And I mean, it just seems overwhelming. Josie plays club league volleyball, but it's not a traveling. Super games are in Kansas City. But I mean, there's other clubs in Kansas City. I mean, you have to buy a plane ticket a couple times a month for everyone that goes. I mean, it's bonkers, and they're playing all over the nation, and
they're investing thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. When what if they just invested that same amount of money and they just played rec league and invested that same amount of money into the stock market, into a good, college fund with a 5 to 10% dividends, it really is crazy.
Yeah. My expectation for my kids is that they're doing something physical each semester.
Yes.
And it can be a sport. It can be weightlifting. If it's not at school, they can go with me to the gym, jiu-jitsu. You can, my son did that for a couple of years. They just have to keep their bodies moving.
Yeah.
And
I think one of the things too is, what we see parents do and families do, Christian families do, is they allow this to become all consuming, and they are no longer going to youth group. You saw this as a youth pastor, right? They're no longer going to youth group. They're no longer going to church on Sundays because tournaments are on the weekends, and they're missing out on that spiritual formation in their life. And they begin to, what are we teaching them then? What are the principles we're teaching them? This is more important than God. And that's super dangerous. And so we stopped it. We just we're not going to do this again with any of our other children. They can play rec ball, they can play junior high ball, they can play high school, whatever. But 2 of them kind of found their niche in marching band,
Yeah.
And another one found their niche in singing and the musicals at school, and loved it, amazing. And that all that has its own pressures and demands and time constraints. But our rule was, you are not missing your youth group and you're not missing church on Sundays.
Yeah. Do you expect your kids to go to college?
That's the other thing. It's really interesting. I don't remember us giving that as an expectation. Obviously, I'm a college professor. Education's huge. I have a doctorate, right? We emphasized education being important. We emphasized that we talked a lot about college. We talked a lot about, hey, where do you want to go when you go to college? So I guess there's certainly an expectation, but I don't remember us saying we expect you to go to college.
Never spoken.
It was never spoken. It's very much unspoken, and we talked about it a lot. And I think there's a lot of things that happened in that vein. Because we talked about it, it became an expectation and it became a way of life. But don't know if we said specifically this. Things like I don't think we ever gave a curfew with our kids.
Oh,
you know what I mean? We talked more about, hey, who are you with? What are you doing? Where are you going? What time do you think you'll be home? And by that, go ahead.
What's interesting about the law of the cream, children will live up to the expectations placed on them. is I have this other law, and it's almost a paradox. And I call it the law of the joystick. Striving for control will lead to out of control children. And so it's this weird like expectations. It's not quite control, but there's like, it's an expectation. But when you try to control things too much, it can backfire. And I'm not sure how to articulate the balance in between those two dynamics. But I do the same thing. My kids are just now driving, and just now, we're at the place where where they would need a curfew, right? Because I'm not the one taking them or driving them around. And my son, I mean, just this past Wednesday asked, when do you want me home? And I said, you're the one who has to wake up in the morning.
Yeah.
Like
It's part of it's self-leadership, teaching them self-leadership.
yeah. But and he chose a really good, reasonable time, and I'm like, okay, that's fine. But yeah, I need to give that more thought, because when I look at all 17 laws, I'm like, man, some of these could look like they contradict each other, but they don't. But how do we navigate through those? Because I mean, curfew, that's one that could easily be an expectation.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it could be one where it's like, yeah, you don't need to control that.
Yeah.
Teach your kids how to be, independent and responsible. And especially if they're waking them, like I don't wake my kids up. I make them use their alarm clock to wake themselves up. And so that falls on them. So I'm like, if you're out late, it's not cutting into my sleep, it's cutting into your sleep. So letting that natural consequence be the
Yes.
teacher instead of me.
Yeah, I think actually you that's a really good one, Aaron, was the whole natural consequence, because they have to learn self-management, self-leadership. We never got our kids up. They had to learn to set their own alarm, and you allow there to be a natural consequence with that, and you don't bail them out. I think so many parents want to bail their kids out, and then they don't get to experience the natural consequence. No, the natural consequences are some of the best teachers in the world. And if we spare them from the natural consequence, then how are they going to learn some of those painful things in life of, oh, note to self, don't do that. We would give our kids one grace on, like, for example, they'd call us, hey, I left my homework at home. Can you bring it to me? We give them one grace. We do it one time, and then, sorry, you're going to have to take that late grade or take that 0. And you're going to have to, manage yourself. And you need to remember your computer, your iPad, your books, your assignments, whatever. You've got to learn to manage yourself. Now, obviously, in that process, you're training them, you're reminding them. In junior high, do you have in your backpack? Do you have,
Yeah,
you're training them. It's not just like let them just fend for themselves. But even like the curfew, it goes back to principles of how to live. And if they love Jesus, then how are they going to live? So we gave our kids tons of freedom. I felt like they had lots of freedom. But here's what happens, Aaron. Parents, we invert the freedom. Okay. So when kids are little, they should have very little freedoms, right? And they also have very little responsibilities. But you're training. And when they're older, they should have actually lots of freedoms. When I'm talking like teenagers, 16, 17 years old, they should have lots of freedoms, but they also have lots of responsibilities. And what parents do is their 16-year-old makes a bad decision, and then they go back to high control. And when they go back to high control, that's when there's rebellion. Okay. That's when they like really will push back against that. And so we kind of invert this. Right? We take away their car, we take away their phone, we take away their all the time with their friends. We ground them. Okay, and so they don't have. We limit all their freedoms, and instead, I think they learn some of that by allowing them to experience some of the natural consequences.
Yeah.
Okay, and then they're way more responsible when they are 16, 17, 18, and they handle those freedoms with responsibility.
Yeah, and I remember I was listening to Doug Fields, and I think maybe he was talking about curfew. I don't know. It was something, but he basically said, uh, you know your kids are going to fall short, right? They're not perfect. They're human, and he wanted them to have some of their first failures while they're under his roof instead of in the dorm or in the military, wherever the kids are. And I thought that was pretty wise too. Like let them fail at home
Yes.
and learn some of those lessons with the protection of that family environment instead of out there all by themselves.
I, I think that's a lot of wisdom. We talk about that a lot in our family. Not that we want our kids to fail, but we want it to be in the environment of that stable family life, so you can talk through it, and you can help them navigate some of those consequences and some of those things that hurt. It just hurts.
Yeah.
It's hard and it's hurtful. And we always wanted our kids to again, not to fail, but to even struggle with their faith while they're still under our roof.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Struggle with their faith, go through some doubts. And in fact, our oldest son, Trey, he's got a sermon built around that first experience when he came to me and said, Dad, how do I know that Christianity is true? He's 14, right? How do I know that Christianity is true? Like, Muslims die for their faith. How do we know that? And he said, I pondered asking my dad that question for weeks, wondering how's my dad going to respond to this? And my dad's response was such a relief, because he says, my dad was like, yes, this is awesome, Trey. And it's awesome because you are starting the process of making your faith your own. Yeah. It's not ours. It's not your mom and dad's. You're trying to make faith yours, and you're wrestling through these big ideas in life. And as a Christian, we don't have to be afraid of truth. So let's go discover truth. Go read about some of these other religions. Let's talk about it. Let's discuss it, and allow truth to rise to the top, to rise to the surface. Let the cream of truth rise to the top, if you will.
Yeah. It's good.
But you think about this principle. I love this principle. The cream will rise to the top. You think about also, like, if we don't have a standard, and our expectations should be high, reasonably high. Human nature and tendency is to take the easy way out. Okay. Human nature is the path of least resistance. Mm-hmm. And so we talked a lot about doing hard things, and doing hard things simply because it's building our character. It's not fun. It's not enjoyable. In fact, it's just hard. And whether that is learning to share your faith at a public school, or whether that is doing an assignment that's really painful, whether that is maybe taking an AP class that's really hard, but we're going to do hard things because it is training our character, or whether that is, if you start a sport, you're not going to quit. Yeah. You're not going to quit. We can reevaluate it at the end of the season, but you're not going to quit in the middle just because it's hard. You're going to finish, and then we can reevaluate whether you're going to do it next year or not, or next season or not. Okay. And that's open for discussion. But quitting in the middle is never open for discussion, no matter what. Mm-hmm. A class, an assignment, an essay, a sport, church, like that is never an option. And so, are we training our kids to persevere through difficult, hard things? Are we training our kids to quit when it gets tough, when it gets hard? Because if we are, then they're going to quit on their marriages. They're going to quit on their kids when they're parents. They're going to quit on a job when it gets difficult. They're going to quit. I mean, you fill in the blank, and they are going to quit when it gets hard, and life is hard. In fact, me and my boys, we even think about things that are hard, even though they're adult children, and we do hard things together. Like, whether that is physical, or whether that's spiritual, or whether it's emotional, we think of different challenges that helps us become better men, to do hard things.
Are you still doing your push-ups?
Still, Still doing the push-ups.
How many are you up to? What
Yeah.
day-
So today is I've gone from 3 sets to 4 sets. I've moved to 5 sets, and it's 51, 51, 51, 50, 50. So what's that? Is that 253?
Okay.
I think today's 253.
Man. It's a lot of push-ups.
Yeah. So that's one of those things that my sons came up with.
Yeah.
I added sit-ups because my core is a little weak, so I need to work on that stomach when you get older. My boys don't need to work on their stomach, but I do. So,
yeah. If some people want more of this wisdom, do you happen to have a podcast out there that?
That's great.
This is totally not a scripted setup.
Not at all. My dear friend Charlie Alcock and I have a podcast. It's called Good Days Podcast. Good Days with Eddie and Charlie. It is a ministry focused podcast, but there's a lot of, I think, life principles that can come out of that as well.
Good Youth Ministry Podcast. Yeah. Great podcast. I'll put up your link to the Apple podcast page in the notes also.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for taking some time.
Yeah, Aaron, this has been fun. Thank you.
Good.
This is a blast. When I can talk about parenting, or man, I'm really passionate about helping our kids thrive and draw closer to Jesus. So thanks for having me on the podcast. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. If you want to do more, I have 17 minus 5, 12.
12 more.
12 more. I'm trying to get a guest for each one of these. I've done a lot of them where it's just me talking through it, but I'm trying to get a guest on all of these.